because you have learned the introductory notes about wines. We had a look at both viticulture, vitkist, and then winemaking myself. And in these classes, we were focusing on so far still and sparkling wines mainly, but where we are going today is looking at fortified wines. Now, when we talk about fortified wines, there are two main groups that we differentiate, and this is really dependent on the time of adding the spirit to the base wine. So on that basis, we either talk about arrested fermentation. So when your base wine is still fermenting, you add the spirit, and thereby increasing the alcohol content, you arrest or stop the fermentation. And in that case, you either would be coming to port wines or to Madeira. So we are pretty much staying within Portugal. And if you do the addition of the grape spirit after fermentation has completed, then we are going to talking about sherry. And this is what we are here to do today. So in terms of what I would like to do is to have a look at how sherry has come about. So we are going to be going to the Iberian Peninsula in Europe, and to the very, very southwest corner of that, almost very close to the tip of Africa at the Strait of Gibraltar. The production of wine, in fact, in this part of Spain takes you back now nearly 3,000 years, because the Phoenicians were the first ones who arrived and introduced the cultivation of vines, and wine-related activities then continued ever since. The Iberian Peninsula, of course, was conquered by the Romans and integrated into the Roman Empire, which was stretching from the southwest of Europe across to the Byzantine Empire and up to the north or northern parts of Europe, to the Alps. And they have actually got documented relics, as well as you can see, depictions in the forms of mosaics and other artwork in terms of viticulture and winemaking. However, what is really interesting is for us to consider what is by the Sherry Academy, within the Sherry Academy we call the land of Sherish, because it is really the time that we also linguistically start to resemble today's sherry. So around the beginning of the 8th century, the Ottoman Empire and the Islamic conquest of the Iberian Peninsula happened. Practically for 800 years, today's Spain and Portugal area were under the rule of Islam and the Islamic Empire, and there was a very rich and flourishing culture in terms of arts, sciences, architecture. Of course, this was influencing a great deal, and the cultivation of vines and the growing of grapes was transformed, as obviously in Islamic culture and the consumption of alcohol is forbidden. However, interestingly, the transformation of the vineyards really saw the focus on production of raisins, and distillation was continued because alcohol was used for diffusing spices, herbs, and other materials in alcohol, and creating medicinal drinks and medicinal products. In fact, the word alcohol itself comes from Arabic, alcohol, as you will see it on the slide. And if you relate to quite a few of the other words in English coming in, whether it's algebra, algorithm, and all the other words, these actually reflect all the Arabic heritage of the words. And therefore, it's not surprising that when we say that there was a really rich culture, that if you think about sciences, arts, architecture, these tend to have a very rich Islamic and Arabic influence on that. Moving on to the Middle Ages, practically the Iberian Peninsula was taken back or reconquered, which is the Reconquista, by King Alfonso, who actually was also a wine grower. And that was a time that the city of Jerez was created into a frontier town to protect the Iberian and Spanish empires. So, as you can see on this map, from the 6th century BC, from Jerez, 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 you arrive around the 13th century to something that kind of resembles today's names, just written with an X. So it's Jerez de la Frontera. And from there, over time, the word shifted, and Jerez, Jerez, and today's word actually is Jerez de la Frontera, so with a J. And when you talk about sherry wines in Spain, then actually they don't talk about sherry as such, but they talk about Vino de Jerez, so the wines of Jerez and the area. So that's an interesting, I think, background to understand where the word sherry comes from, how it has been influenced, and in fact the long historical relationship of the region with wine growing. So it's no surprise that wine has become an essential part of the life of Jerez, and also not so far and neighboring Cadiz. As these cities are located in the southwest corner of Spain on the Atlantic Ocean, therefore they lend themselves very well for supplying expeditions, ships, and flotillas with all the necessary staple for the seafaring man. And that was including, of course, wine as well. Because you must remember that at the time when we are back still in the 1500s, there was no tap water, there was no drinking water that was possible, that we could consume without any adverse impact, because water was a very precious commodity, clean drinking water, and very difficult to get. So it was much easier to drink wine, or sometimes just to also dilute water with wine, which had a certain, of course, wine had the acidity to it. It had a certain pH level, and therefore it neutralized any bacteria or so in the water and made the consumption of water possible. So that's kind of the historical legacy. And it was in the 19th century that sherry really emerged on the stage as we know it, because aging of wines was now fully legal again. It has become actually an export commodity, and of course, as I mentioned, with seafaring and sea voyage, it was also a key requirement that the wine had to have a stability. So hence the fortification, because by increasing the alcohol content of the base wine by fortification, or in other words, the addition of the grape spirit, they created a stable wine stable liquid that was able to withstand long sea voyages. So, and of course, with the advent of this and the widespread marketing success, it became clear that this was a product on its own right. So the foundation of some of the big names of the sherry houses date back to the 19th century. As you can see listed here, for example, Domecq, Barbadillo, González Villas, Williams and Hubert were all established as sherry houses or sherry bodegas in the 19th century. These brands and these bodegas still exist today. I would also call your attention to the background picture of what a bodega looks like in terms of architecture, which we are going to touch upon later in the context of sherry production. So the 20th century actually saw a vibrant sherry trade with the branded producers, big names establishing themselves in the market. However, Spain, similarly to any other European vineyards, did not escape the devastation of phylloxera in the late 19th century. Phylloxera, a bug that gets into the roots of the grapevine, and by eating it and sucking the roots dry from the saps, it practically, over a prolonged period of time, slowly but surely kills the vines. And that was also decimating the vineyards in Jerez. However, recovery was fairly quick, and that was the time when the grape varieties that we know today and that we use for the production of sherry wine today were established firmly in Jerez. So in the 20th century, what happened was also that by establishing brands, by establishing a very clear style of a fortified wine, there was a need emerging to seek protection, and that was through the establishment of the geographical indication or denominación de origen, the DO. And the first DO will be actually Jerez. And it was in the Paris Agreement that the first international agreement came about protecting the origin. So protecting the origin means that it is acknowledged that a certain style of wine or a certain product may be produced only in a delimited area and is associated with a certain region of the world. So it cannot be kind of picked up and copy-pasted across to other regions, but that needs to be respected. So the first Spanish wine law was introduced in 1933, so nearly 100 years ago, and the first DO, so the first protected region was Jerez itself in 1935, and it was also the time when the so-called industry body, which is the Consejo Regulador, was established. Now, the Consejo Regulador has played an important role ever since, and we are going to have a look at that later. So, as I have highlighted at the very beginning of today's class, we are focusing on the southwestern corner, as you can see in the insert. So the southwestern corner of Spain, Jerez, where we've got the dot highlighted. And this tiny piece of land or tongue of land on the Iberian Peninsula is actually facing the Gibraltar and North Africa on the other side. So what you need to remember that it is a very, very southerly part of Europe. Now, there are three designated zones within Jerez, or the sherry region, if you like. The first one is, as I said, around the town of Jerez de la Frontera, as it's highlighted on the map and the surrounding area. However, there are also another two areas that are kind of have a special designation as a zona de crianza, and these will be on the Atlantic coast, Sanlúcar de Barrameda, as you can see, just as I'm pointing out here on the westerly edge of the Sherry region, and also El Puerto de Santa Maria, just southwest of Jerez de la Frontera, again very close to the Atlantic coast. There are other smaller areas which are noted, but the two key important areas for you to remember will be Jerez de la Frontera and Sanlúcar de Barrameda. This area that the triangle of the three cities enclose, and where wine production for the purpose of sherry takes place, is approximately 7,000 hectares. It had a significant reduction over the period of time in the 20th century because of the fortunes and tribulations of sherry wine. So there are three denominations or DOs within Jerez. The first one is Jerez or Vino de Jerez, in other words, sherry wines. Then the second one is Manzanilla, and Manzanilla is a specific type of Fino wine that is produced exclusively in Sanlúcar de Barrameda. So if I jump back just to the map here again, then now you understand why it plays such an important role in Jerez production. And then the third DO is that actually there is a vinegar which has a protected designation of origin, which is produced practically from a sherry base, and is a fantastic material to use in cooking, readily associated with Spanish cuisine. I think it is also key, as I highlighted, to understand the market dynamics associated with sherry wines. I wonder if you have actually tasted sherry wine in India, because it's one of those very, very, very rare, if not impossibly rare, commodities in the Indian market that is really difficult to find, if at all. So as I mentioned, sherry wines, the production and consumption of sherry wine has been decreasing really significantly, and we are going to have a look at that in detail. However, it has more or less stabilized at around 46 million bottles as such. And as you can see, there are three countries that really make up the bulk of the global sherry market, and that will be Spain, with about a third of the sherry being drunk in Spain. And then the other two major countries will be Great Britain and the Netherlands. You will see that all the other countries, whether it's Germany, the United States, Belgium, France, Canada, Switzerland, and so on, these are really accounting for a very, very small fraction of the global sherry market. So Spain, Great Britain, and the Netherlands make up the bulk of the global sherry market. As I mentioned, the regulation and the promotion of sherry wines around the world has been entrusted by law to the sherry regulatory body, the Consejo Regulador de Vino de Jerez, and they make up a number of functions. So they produce various technical guidance on viticultural aspects, such as where vineyards may be located, what varieties may be grown, how you need to plant vineyards, and what are the permitted viticultural practices in the vineyard when you grow grapes. Similarly, they will be setting the standard for wine production as well. So they will be setting the limits of how much wine can be produced, about the rules of fortification, minimum aging requirements, the type of oak you may need to use, and what styles of sherry is allowed to be produced, so that there is a consistency on the market for the consumer. So the Consejo Regulador also issues their seal of approval, and all the wines that are being sold on the market as sherry wines produced in the Jerez region of Spain need to bear the hallmark of quality and control by having the Consejo Regulador's stamp on it that you can see on the screen now. Let us have a look at how the grapes are grown, which are used for sherry production. So this is the Iberian Peninsula from above, and what is key to remember, as I said, is that it is the southernmost wine region in Europe. If you look at here the tip of land where the white clouds from the satellite photo can be seen, this is already North Africa. This tiny piece of land where these two tiny pieces of land where they almost meet is the Strait of Gibraltar. So we are really in a very, very southerly area. As I said, Jerez has about 7,000 hectares of vineyard and around 9 municipalities or 9 towns. But the two key for us will be Jerez de la Frontera and San Luca de Barrameda. So what is specific about the climate is that there are 300 days of sunny days a year. It is an absolute paradise in terms of having sunny days and really a very low amount of rainfall, as you can see, around 600 liter per square meter, so 25 inches an average annual rainfall, very, very small amount. Mild winters, very hot summers, and there are two prevailing winds that will be key to remember, the Poniente and the Levante. Poniente will be coming in from the Atlantic, normally moist, wet, fresh, humid, and then the drying and warm wind from the east, the Levante, so from the Mediterranean, Levantine area of the Mediterranean that the wind is sweeping in. So Poniente and Levante are bringing the two very different winds, and of course from the west it is the humidity, the moisture, the rain that we are interested in. This would be a typical landscape from Jerez de la Frontera. Gentle rolling slopes with vineyards where there is quite a bit of distance in between the rows. They are not grown very high, but kept fairly close to the ground. And as you can see, the soil has this whitish impact because of the very high chalk content. And this specific soil is called the albariza. The albariza is the finest and the best soil for grape production in the Jerez area. The quality of the vineyards will depend on a lot of different factors. So it will be the soil, the altitude, the exposure to the sun, how they roll these, how these hairs roll, and also equally the distance from the sea. As you may expect, the closer to the Atlantic coast, the more rain is being deposited. So there are two main pagos or types of vineyards, the superior and the Jerez zona, so the kind of standard. The albariza soil, as I said, is very high in chalky content, so calcium carbonate. That's why, as you can see, it's really white. There is a very good moisture retention capacity, and obviously from origin being very close to the sea and having this very high chalky calcium carbonate content, it is a sedimentation and former presence of sea thousands of years ago is what has created this very special albariza soil. Other types of soil may well be found also in the Jerez area, the arenas in the barros. These have a much lower lime content or chalk content. These are more sandy, clay, and deeper, darker soils, as you can see on the photo from the soil types. So for the production of sherry, there are three main grape varieties you need to remember. Palomino is the first and the predominant grape variety in the Jerez area. And the other two include Pedro Ximénez, quite often abbreviated as PX, and the very fragrant and readily associated with sweet wines, Moscatel. So Palomino is, as I said, the primary or predominant sherry grape variety. As you can see, it produces large bunches, large berries. It's got it's a very neutral grape, if you like. It's a pale juice, normally very kind of light lemon, watery, easy, low alcohol, a very neutral, very unexciting wine. So we will understand why it is a perfect base material for sherry production. Pedro Ximénez, as opposed to Palomino, produces a higher sugar content, higher acidity, with more with thicker skin. So it is much more suited for the production of wines where we really want to have sweetness and we need the base sugar to be present, as well as the aromatics are richer and more complex. Similarly, Moscatel will be is a grape variety which is pretty much used for sweet wine production. Again, higher sweetness, higher maturity that it can achieve, and with better acidity, again, which is key for a wine that you want to age further or that you want to have balance with that sweetness. In terms of the cultivation, I thought to bring in this slide because as I said, rain needs to be captured when the poniente brings it. It is otherwise a very dry area, being very southerly in Europe. So the acerpiado, these kind of little boxes almost that you create in the vineyard around your vines and in between the rows, they are meant to capture the water and to retain it so that the soil has time to soak it in instead of running down the slope. And it is quite often said that the amount of rain that is brought by the poniente during the winter will be determining the amount of wine that will be produced the next year. So the lower amount of rain, the less wine that you can produce. The harvest is fairly early on in August and September because the average sugar level will reach the required level of 11, 12.5 baume, which is one of the sugar measurement methods. And today there will be a mix of hand and machine harvest. So it really depends on the bodega. So we've got the grapes, and how do we actually make sherry wine? So sherry wine production is starting with the production of the base wine. So Palomino grapes will be fermented, as we have learned during the winemaking class yesterday, into a very neutral base white wine. Once the fermentation is completed, the wine will be fortified, and there will be it will go into what is called the sobre table, so the initial stage of the wine production. That's when the floor will start to develop, and we are going to talk about the floor, but the floor is practically a layer of film on top of the liquid that is developing because of a very specific yeast. And this is the specialty of the Jerez region, that this this film of yeast develops on top of the liquid in the barrel, and then we put that into the aging process. And the main types of sherries that we are going to have a look at in detail are Fino and Manzanilla, Amontillado, Palo Cortado, and Oloroso. So the vinification has taken place, and as you can see, for the production of sweet sherries from Moscatel and Pedro Ximénez. These will be extremely ripe, as I was saying, so they will have very, very high sugar content, and they are also richly aromatic. So in order to produce a sweet wine, the fermentation will stop at a point where there is still a lot of sugar, residual sugar left in the must, and then the addition of the spirit will take place, and then it goes into the aging process for Moscatel or Pedro Ximénez. There are also the so-called blended or Vinos generosos de licores, which is practically a combination of a base sherry of either Fino, Manzanilla, Amontillado, Palo Cortado, or Oloroso, as you can see at the bottom of the screen on the left-hand side. And it will get either just the Pedro Ximénez sweet grape juice or rectified grape must. Rectified grape must is nothing more than a highly concentrated grape must, so it will be extremely sweet, and that's when we talk about the pale or cream sherries, and then medium and cream sherries. So those are sherries, sweet sherries, which are not made just by themselves, but actually is a combination of sherry and a sweetening agent. So I have touched upon the issue of floor, and this is what I would like to have a look at in detail. So, as I said, Palomino is a very neutral grape variety, and the first base wine is produced from this through the process of alcoholic fermentation, which we covered. So, the what matters is that a maximum of 70 liters can be extracted from 100 kilos of grapes, and therefore there are specific stages of extraction. So the free run juice, the first press wine, and the second press wine. It goes through the classification of the must. As you can see, the free run juice, press wine, first press, and second press. And of course, as we go up from the free run juice, which is the finest, clearest, the least extraction of phenolics and skin, you will have a much more richer for the second press. Alcoholic fermentation takes place, as we have discussed. It's practically sugar and yeast transforms it into alcohol, carbon dioxide, and heat. So let me just jump to what will be the most exciting for us, is when we've got this base wine. It's a fairly light, 11 to maximum 12.5% alcoholic strength base wine, very neutral. And this is where the development of the floor will start, as you can see at the top of the liquid. Now, what is this floor and why is it so interesting for us? Sherry wines are set apart by this very specific taste of that yeasty character. And that is because this very thin film of floor develops from the Saccharomyces strain of yeast. And as you may recall your baking classes, it's got that very pleasant smell and taste. That's one aspect. But the other aspect is that when you've got a liquid in a barrel or in a container that is in contact with oxygen, then that would start to oxidize. However, when this layer of floor is covering the whole liquid, then that's going to prevent oxidization. And that's why it's an important element of sherry production. So, as you can see from this photo, it's actually from a transparent barrel. The floor is covering it. So for us to be able to maintain the floor, the temperature needs to be approximately 20 degrees. And we are going to jump back very soon to discussing the architecture of the bodegas. Humidity needs to be proper and aeration as well. And alcoholic content needs to be lower than 16% because otherwise the floor, the yeast will die off. So the fortification takes place, and the fortification of the very, very light wines will be classified straight away as Vinos, and they will be fortified at a lower level. The very fine wines are able to retain all of the floor on top of the wine, and that's why we fortify them at a lower degree so that the alcohol will not kill off this yeast. Whereas those barrels where the floor is a bit patchy and is not perfectly covering the liquid, so there is partial oxidative aging taking place because the liquid is in direct contact of air. Those will be classified as olorosos, and they will be fortified to a higher alcoholic strength of about 17–18%. As you can see, there is a very obvious difference between those finer sherries, the Finos, which have been fortified to 15% alcoholic strength and are aging what we call through biological aging because they age with floor, as opposed to the ones with oxidative aging, which develop a darker orange, garnet, brown color and have been fortified to 17% alcoholic strength. So the sobre table is going to be the initial start of the journey. And as you can see on the middle photo, these bodegas are with really high ceilings so that it allows, for example, stacking of the barrels on top of each other. So the sobre table, and then the solera system. And it is also very high because heat rises. So for you to deliver 20 degrees, whilst outside it may be 35 and 38 degrees centigrade, you need to allow the heat to rise. And that's why these bodegas have been constructed in this manner. At the end of the first year, there is a second classification from the sobre table. When it is transferred, again, they are looking at how perfectly the floor has remained. And we are going to talk about this in a second. In terms of the natural sweet wines or Vinos Dulces Naturales, we need to focus on Pedro Ximénez and also Moscatel. As you will see from the photos, these are picked, left to dry, or they are also picked once they have been slightly shriveled, so it's a late harvest. And the essence of the late harvest is that the sugar content rises, the flavors get really concentrated. We produce two different types of sweet wines. As you can see, both are fairly dark, but the brown is the Moscatel, and the one that is almost like a black coffee with dark green olive color on the rim is Pedro Ximénez. These wines will be very sweet. Pedro Ximénez can often contain 400 to 600 grams per liter residual sugar when we are already having it in the glass ready for consumption. Let us talk about the aging process, or the crianza, because it plays a pivotal role in production of sherries. So first of all, the cask that will be used will be very heavily seasoned, made from American oak. These casks are fairly large with 600-liter capacity, and they are never filled up to the top fully, but about 100 liters is missing, and this will allow space in the barrels, as you can see, for the floor to develop, and either for the biological aging in those instances where the floor is completely intact for Fino, or for oxidized style wines where the floor is a bit patchy and therefore oxidatively aged wines, such as, for example, Olorosos. So the Solera system is the system of these barrels layered up, and the criaderas are practically how you move wine from one year to the next, from one level of the Solera to the next level. Every year that the wines will be looked at, and there will be what is called a fractional blending. You introduce the youngest wine from the Sobretable to the top level of your Solera system in the first criadera, and then later on, a year later, you look at how intact the floor is, and then you move it into either further down to age it further as a Fino, or if the floor has started to disappear, then you're talking about moving it into recipifying as an Oloroso. So you can see how from the Sobretable it is moving into through the criadera during the years. So the fractional blending also brings with itself the interest that the liquid is moving down. So practically, you will always have to reach below the floor to get the wine out, and also the level of the volume of the liquid is decreasing because of the angel share, which is practically the evaporation because of the oak storage or barrel storage. So as the question may well come to you that how old is actually the sherry wine in the bottle? Well, in the case of a Fino, you will always have this fractional blending of younger wines, but then you also may have, very, very small fractions of very old wines blended in it because of this movement in the Solera system. As I mentioned, the cathedral-like architecture of the bodegas is very purpose-driven by allowing the heat to rise, and therefore to maintain the approximately 20 degrees at the level of the Soleras, whilst outside the heat is quite significant. Now, when we talk about the blended sherries or Vinos Generosos de Licor, then we talk about pale cream, medium, and cream sherries, which have been created from the addition of a sweetening material, either Pedro Ximénez or rectified grape must. These were very specifically invented for the British market, and these are the wines which were really popular in the early 20th century up to the 60s, 70s, when their decline started very fast. So the blend, if you look at the styles of sherries, then we talk about the dry sherries, Manzanilla, Fino, and Amontillado. Amontillado is originally used to be a Fino that then has lost some of the floor but retained quite a lot of the finesse, whereas Manzanilla is produced in San Luca di Barrameda. Oloroso and Palo Cortado are wines which have lost the floor and therefore have been oxidatively aged, deeper in color, and the blends will be Moscatel and Pedro Ximénez. I will be sharing the slides, so because we are nearly approaching the end of the class and we still need to cover vermouth, I would let you go through, but practically what you will be able to read in more detail here is the fact that Fino and Manzanilla are the finest sherries. These are 45 to 15% strength. Manzanilla, as I said, is coming from San Luca di Barrameda, and in fact, why it is separated and differentiated from Fino is because of this very specific salty kind of chamomile flavor that it has. And chamomile in Spanish is manzanilla, so hence the name. And this wine can be made only in San Luca de Barrameda, and it is that coastline effect, that maritime impact that is responsible for this style. Amontillado will be partly oxidized and oxidatively aged, as I said, hence the color, but still fairly light in terms of the brown and garnet. Whereas Oloroso will be that deeper, darker mahogany. It will have a very rich profile of nutty flavors or a dried orange peel. And Palo Cortado is something that used to be a very fine sherry, but has developed the aging oxidative character as well as slight sweetness. These are very fine gastronomic wines that you can use. And then, of course, the sweet wines, Moscatel, Pedro Ximénez, as I said, richly oxidatively aged, very sun-dried grapes or shriveled grapes, hugely sweet, extremely luscious wines. As you can see, Moscatel and Pedro Ximénez specifically is almost like a double espresso when you look at it. And the consumption is really small quantities because it's such a concentrated but a fantastic drink. So if you get the opportunity, please do go out and taste. Let us get then to the second part and focus on vermouth as well to cover these aromatized wines off. Now, what is key to know about vermouth is that it is an aromatic wine that is made from a combination of a base wine, fortification, so the addition of grape spirit, and also botanicals, which are responsible for the character and the flavor profile of this wine. Apparently, vermouth has been, let me just see, vermouth has been produced as early as in China and India, dating back 2,000 years, apparently. But in fact, what we know as vermouth today, it is more the historical heritage that we have, and also it pretty much goes back to the Middle Ages in Europe, in Germany, and other areas where, for medicinal purposes, various botanicals were used to infuse an alcoholic drink, and was really nothing to do with gastronomy, but pretty much focusing on the medical benefits of this. It was only in the late 18th century that actually in Turin, so in northern Italy, some drinks were developed for the purpose of being consumed as aperitifs, so as a pre-meal drink. And these were also using a combination of fortified, slightly either sweet or completely dry wine. And therefore, the two styles which developed and which we know today as the two main styles of vermouths are the extra dry, or the rosso, which tends to be the red, which tends to be sweeter. So these vermouths are fairly key ingredients today for cocktails in the bartending and mixologist part of the drinks and gastronomy industry. So the historical recap, I have probably highlighted the most pertinent points. The word itself is interesting because vermouth is practically the French variation of vermouth in German, and vermouth is wormwood, so a specific botanical that was used and that gave the name for this drink. So in terms of production, as I mentioned, vermouths normally use a very high. Someone is not on mute and can.
I think yes. I think one of the students. Please be on the mute, all of you, so that it will have a seamless experience without any noise disturbance.
Vijit sir, how they are unmuted themselves?
From the beginning they were muted. I don't know probably what has happened after that.
It's fine. I think now it just was to make sure we are not talking at the same time. So it is very plain and neutral grape varieties for the production of vermouth-based wine. Claret Blanche, Picoupeau, Bianchet, Catarato, Trebbiano, all of them are very neutral white wines, fairly low alcohol, which of course does not matter because we'll be adding grape spirit to it and fortified to 16 to 18 degrees normally. And as I said, the various botanicals, and that will be really driven by the brand, by the house of vermouth that they decide, and that's normally quite guarded recipes of the producers. There are three main types of styles. Italian vermouth will be pretty much the rosso, so the red-colored, mildly bitter, slightly sweet vermouths, whereas the French is normally the pale and dry vermouths, and it's rather bitter than sweet. And the bitterness quite often comes from nutmeg or bitter orange peel. As a newer style and a more modern style of vermouth that was developed is the Bianco, which is normally a pale and sweeter style of white vermouth. In terms of other vermouth-like aromatized wines, we can bring in three brands. In terms of production methods, they are pretty similar to how vermouth is produced, that there is a base wine that is fortified and then the addition of botanicals and seasoning as per the brand. But they like to differentiate themselves as not being vermouths, but aromatized wines. So, major brands would include Lillet, Saint-Raphael, and Dubonnet. They are pretty much used for cocktails and in mixology because of their very aromatic nature that they can bring to a cocktail. And with that, I have come to the end of the presentation today. It has taken me probably a bit longer than normal, so we are just at the end, but I would love to open the floor for questions if possible, and we can still stay 10 minutes or so.
Yes, absolutely, sir. Mr. Peter, we had a couple of questions now, and I'll be helping you to just go through those in a while. One of our students says the first question is, what is the exclusive feature of wines coming from Jerez? Exclusive feature.
Second.
The exclusive feature is that these are fortified wines which start off with floor aging, and then as they progress, they may divert from the floor to the oxidative aging. And they are produced in Jerez.
Right. Okay. Second question from one of our students says, what is the most conducive soil for the growing of grapes suited for sherry wines?
Okay, so as we have discussed during the lesson, the albariza soil is the most conducive one, the very white soils, and these are producing the finest sherry wines, and then arenas and barros are the other two main types of soil, as you will have seen, with a lower amount of chalk and a lower amount of chalk content, hence the darker color.
Okay, Mr. Peter, the third question is how the sherry wines are classified and on the basis of what the quality is determined?
Right, so normally you would have the quality classification comes in terms of what you need to understand is that sherry is a style-driven drink. So you talk about finos, you talk about olorosos, you talk about palo cortados, amontillados. And then the house styles will slightly differ. Where the quality you can set apart is that you may talk about finos which have been unfiltered, so they come on as unrama, for example, as a specific type of bottling that is then consumed very quickly after bottling and is normally aimed at restaurants. You will also have quality distinction when you talk about aged olorosos or aged palo cortados, and then age designation will be there. So whether these are normally 15 to sometimes 30, 45 years old, and these will be representing a very fine segment of sherries. Palo cortado itself is a category that is very small, and because it started out as a fine fino, again, it is a very specific type, or it may well be that the certain producers have practically the standing. So it is a brand-driven, style-driven market where brands dominate, and it will be the age distinctions that will set some of these apart, or special bottlings, and these will be designating the different levels of quality, if you like, in a kind of classification sense.
Right. I'm sure the students must have got their answers for their queries. Now, the next question is, they're asking, is there any reason why the red grapes are not successfully grown in Spain?
Not at all. I need to say that red grapes are very successfully grown in grapes. So don't be misled by the fact that we concentrated on sherry, where it is white grape varieties that are used. In other lessons, you will learn about regions such as Rioja, for example, where you will learn about black grape varieties. So there will be plenty of red wine coming your way.
Right. Okay. Next question is what kind of blends are done in the making of sherry, and what kind of percentage is ensured in the fractional blending?
Okay, so there are no other blends made than when you talk about the cream sherries, where you blend the sherry with a sweetening agent, whether it is PX or rectified grape must. Otherwise, the sherry will be made from Palomino, and the sweet cherries will be made from Moscatel and Pedro Ximénez. So there's no blending other than for sweetening of the blended types of sherries. And the other second part of the question was the fractional blending, right, or partial. Fractional blending is practically when you have exactly the same type, so it's a fino or an oloroso, but during the years you fractionally blend the wines produced in different years. So when you buy a bottle of fino, it just says the name of the producer, the bodega, and that it's a fino. So for example, it's a González Villas or an Humbertos or a Domecq fino. It doesn't say the vintage, But because of the production method, what we had a look at in the Solera system, there will be a fraction of various vintages that you actually will be enjoying. But that's never known, to you as a consumer, and probably the producer itself would be able just to kind of estimate of how much percentage may remain, of the various years as you go along the system.
Okay. One of the questions says how the faults can be identified during the making of sherry wines.
How what can be identified?
How the faults in a sherry can be identified.
Right. So in sherry, the faults are identified in the same way, but because of the high alcohol content or in the sweeter styles, it can be more difficult. What can be the faults in sherry? Now, in terms of oxidation, that's not going to be an issue because a lot of these wines will be oxidized in style. So if a Fino starts to develop oxidative character, then we don't sell them as a Fino anymore. But of course, then you will assign that barrel for an Oloroso production, which is meant to be oxidized, so it's not an issue. It's going to be then cork taint. The same way, what you need to be very careful with is that with sweet wines, with sherry, with port, and with fortified wines, detecting these off flavors can be a lot more difficult.
Right, Mr. Peter. Okay, we are coming to one last question from the students, and I have got one query, Mr. Peter. I will come back to that later. The last question is one of the students would like to know what makes Palo Cortado is one of the most rare and expensive wines. So, what is the unique feature which makes it different from others?
So Palo Cortado is very fine because it was originally destined to be a Fino, so it retains that character, but it combines masterfully both the floor characters, that yeasty richness and complexity, with a very fine aging of oxidative character. And this is normally produced in very small quantities, which of course contribute to the value. And quite often, what happens is that these can be aged in terms of having the vintage retained, or having the lengths of the aging retained, because they want to just have that very delicate nature of the wine associated with either the year or the aging. And these would normally be aged under the seal of the Consejo Regulador. And in fact, when you want to even just track for winemaking purposes and maintain the wine in the cellar during the year, then you need to have someone present from the Consejo Regulador to certify that the seal has been broken. When it has been moved, it's sealed again, so that the origin and the quality is guaranteed. These are expensive wines, relatively speaking, expensive wines, but it's a very sherries, and even fine and rare sherries are not the most expensive wines in the wine world. And what I would say is that actually this is a major gift for us who love food and wine, because whilst they, fine Palo Cortados are, yes, higher priced, but in terms of the value of the enjoyment they deliver, they are fantastically priced, because you get so much enjoyment for your money that it's insane.
Right, Mr. Peter. Fine, that's all on behalf of the students which we have gathered. Couple of questions. Mr. Peter, I have got one personal query. I'd be really delighted to know if you could just, let us know about the importance of Esperato grass mat.
Right. So the importance of this is really driving back to the production and how the wines are handled, I would say.
Okay. Right, Mr. Peter. I think probably most of our students' questions, queries are met. I'm sure we would love to have your presentation. If probably you can mail it to us, where we can send it to all of our second-year students for them to engage and have the relative learning
Absolutely.
material.
Great.
Right.
Thank you so much, and have a great day, guys.
Thank you so much, Mr. Peter. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, all the students.